Okay, this is one of those rare cases where I somehow managed to finish a book that was 1 star. I don't think I ever have. Usually, if a book is 1 star, I do not have the patience to finish it. And now I'm here. I've wasted half of my month on this one horrible book. And if I'm going to do that, I'm at least going to milk it for some content. Now, I'll be honest with you, at some point, I realized I hated this book pretty early on, maybe a third of the way into it. At that point, I was like, I want to talk about how much I hate this. That's part of why I kept going, because I wanted to give this review. Because in my mind, this book is so blatantly problematic in so many ways, and not to mention just poorly written, in my opinion. And I'm just flabbergasted at how popular it is, and I'm annoyed at the fact that I was drawn to it by the popular opinions. I remember this is one of the first audiobooks I got on Audible. Part of what motivated me to read it was the fact that I have the Audible version of it that I had never used. And so I want to get to my backlog, and I did. And I wouldn't do it again. If I could change things, I wouldn't. I'm glad I did, because we're here. But at the end of the day, this was not a book that I am happy I read, aside from the fact that maybe I can hopefully divert other people from having to waste their time with this book. I'm not going to be giving a detailed rundown of the plot, but I am going to spoil where I need to highlight the reasons why I have a problem with this book. Don't get me wrong. I don't think anyone who likes this book is wrong because I didn't like it. I do think they're wrong for very objective reasons that I will get through. This is one of those rare instances where I generally think this is not just a matter of not being for me. I think it's a book that's problematic, that really just shouldn't be pushed as something worth reading. I'm not saying to ban it, obviously not. I just think there are other books that we could be encouraging that will not just not promote problematic things, but actively promote good things. With all that said, let's get into all the issues I had with the book. Let's start with the basics, which is to say just the writing of the book, the structure of the book, and it as a work of fiction. I'll go ahead and say before I get into it, I recognize that my issues that have to do with more problematic aspects are probably going to taint how I judge the book, meaning I'm probably more inclined to judge its writing and its overall structure more harshly because of my distastes in other areas. With that said, I do feel fairly strong about my opinions here, about how I think things could have done better and how there were certain things that were obviously just poorly executed. Let's start with just the telling, not showing. This book is extremely long, and it's easy to understand why. It's very much about over-exposition and telling the readers what we're supposed to understand and think, and not showing us. Even the central premise, the central theme of this book, 1984, 1Q84, being an allusion to 1984, it is shoehorned in. It is explicitly explained to the reader, though this is an imagery for 1984. And one, I don't think the book is actually a fairly good imagery of that. It basically follows a cult controlled by these speculative, magical or otherworldly type little people, which is supposed to be like a representation of Big Brother, controlling everything. And I get it's a speculative thing and it has maybe some tenuous connection to 1984, but this was not 1984. It's about a government controlling the message. And while there are, of course, very obscure connections there, I just think it really misses the point of 1984 and does a really poor job of making use of that, which explains maybe why he went the lazy route, the author of just telling us, this is 1984, don't you understand? Don't you understand? Let me repeat it for you again and again and again. And part of the problem of the telling and not showing is that a lot of the telling comes in the form of exposition. Exposition that oftentimes feels forced, awkward, and in some situations I'm sitting here learning about the story, learning about the world building from this person who I can't help thinking to myself, why the fuck is he telling us all this? Why was he telling this person all of this? It doesn't make sense that in this situation you would give this information. Even as the story went on, it's like as I understand things better, it's like in that situation there are certain things you might have held back to get what you wanted, get down the way, know what you want. And it just all feels very forced and quite frankly very lazy writing. That's the same for also I think the speculative world building itself. The explanations are tenuous and only go so far as to propel the plot. Our understanding or need to understand the speculative nature of the world is only so far as it will move the plot forward in the direction the author wants to take us. that to me is just blatantly lazy writing. It's creating this world that will give us a series of circumstances that he wants to happen, even though they feel forced and they aren't justifiably explained. It all feels unnatural. Then there's the love story. This is a love story, by the way, that is not just problematic, but it's completely forced and nonsensical. We get to the end, and it turns out our two main protagonists, who are like the two main perspectives we get to most of the book, are actually in love with each other. They met each other at 10, when they were 10 years old, and they didn't see each other again since then. Honestly, when I thought about this and the connection that our main male character had to the other main character was a woman, and it reminded me a lot of Beau is Afraid. Now, I'm not going to really spoil it too much, but there is a overarching arc in Beau is Afraid where he has mommy issues, and it's led to him not getting into any real relationships. He's holding on to the idea of this one girl that he met on a cruise when he was like 10 or maybe 13, somewhere between that range. And he's obsessed with her, even to the end. And when they inevitably meet, they manage to kindle things. And I don't have a problem with it in that story, because that story is about a man who's emotionally destroyed, who is just mentally ill, like who's been so heavily traumatized that he's just completely full of issues. Well, in this story, it just was done as a natural progression, as, oh, this is natural, this is true love, this is meant to be. And in my mind, it's just the perfect example of a weird situation of being obsessed with this person you met like once when you were 10. It's not some fate type thing. It's just weird and creepy, and I think works better if you're implying there's some kind of trauma going on. Then let's go on, I guess, to the sexism, to the problematic aspects of the story, which is, of course, sexism, homophobia, and pedophilia. All of that is not just rife within the story, it feels honestly normalized. So let's start with the sexism, because I think the discussion of our main character's love interest sort of help lead into that, because it becomes apparent later in the story that the main woman character, who's our other main protagonist or main perspective, is there literally as a point of support for the male character. She exists solely to save him, to defend him, to be there as a way to make sure his plot gets progressed. I guess I should have known, because literally every other woman character who exists in the story is there to propel his plot. None of them exists on their own. Most of them, all of them, are literally sex objects. I'm not sure there's a single woman character, quite literally, who isn't described based off her looks, her body, and her breasts. They're all sexualized. Even the 17-year-old child, which I'll get into later when we touch on pedophilia. But the story starts out with our female main protagonist acting or being presented almost as, a very strong, independent woman who's sexually liberated. And as the story goes on, we begin to realize the problems with that perspective. And I think it comes to a head when it reaches the point where she's willing to kill herself, because now she realizes, she's done what she needed to help her love interest, the male character. And she has no reason to live anymore because she won't get to meet him again. And the only thing that keeps her from actually killing herself is the notion that actually maybe I can see him again. Maybe there's hope. And once I realized that, I was like, oh my fucking God. The character I'm supposed to believe is independent and strong, presented as this major female character, is only there literally just to, as a way to prop up the male character, and whose life literally is seen as worthless to her and to the reader if she cannot have him, if he is not there for him, a man she met when she was 10. Now let's get on to outside of that relationship, to just how women are presented. I talked about how their bodies are always talked about, how they're constantly described by every male character perspective. It's normalized. It's not just a problematic aspect that's commented on. It's heavily normalized as this is something we regularly think about. This is obviously the centerpiece of their character. Every female character that exists is presented as a potential sex object for our main male character. He has a lover who is an older woman who's constantly described as by her big breast. She goes nameless until, of course, her husband calls to tell you, oh, something happened to her. She's not even worth explaining what actually happened. It was just some vague explanation of basically the big bads of the story hurt her to get to our main male character. And it's her husband who tells us, and it's at the point we learn about the husband. Once we get the husband's name is when we realize, oh wait, that's the same surname as his lover. And before that point, her name is useless to us. And what actually happened to her doesn't really matter to us. There's another female character who befriends our main female character. Basically, she's a cop. I forgot to mention that our female character main character is she's a serial killer she kills men who are abusing women, which obviously is being presented as as a part of her strong persona, which in principle I don't have a problem with. Although I do have an issue with the fact that it sort of all stems from her having this traumatic sexual experience with being sexually traumatized and violated, and that inevitably being connected to her sexual liberation. Turns out her first time she ever had sex was after she killed a man. She had this drive to have sex, and ever since then, it's presented as that traumatic experience being the reason she is so sexual. And if that's not subtle enough for you, her cop best friend is also sexually liberated. She's also very sexual, and she literally says, "Oh, something traumatic happened to you when you were younger? Because, I think that might be the reason we're so sexual." She says that she was violated when she was a child, and that's probably why she's so sexually active now. And there's this dichotomy where we have sex presented at these women as being sexually liberated women, while simultaneously creating this image of sex, someone who is sexually active, as being a byproduct of trauma, of sex not being a healthy thing, but in fact the result of something unhealthy. That female cop character, she is inevitably killed off screen when what we learn to find out is just in one of her risque sexual encounters, she gets killed. At first, there's a hint of, oh, is this the little people, the big bads of the story? Or I think it turns out that actually it was just, a circumstantial, like she just happened to die. And, that's the result of her risque life. Then let's talk a bit more about the relationship, because they're not just sexually liberated. The first time they meet, I think it was when they hook up with the two guys. It was the female cop's idea, and it's in the situation where we get the best idea of just how homophobic the story is. Because I think before this, there were hints or conversations in the head of our female main character that she's had sexual relations with women before, but she's not gay. It's obviously she's not gay. She just had some sexual acts with them. In this situation, the cop talks about hooking up like in a foursome, and it's like, oh, it's not gay or anything. And our main character says, oh, I'm not either. Then they get wasted. The next day they find out, oh, they actually went full on out, made out, and did full on cunnilingus to each other. But no homo. And after this, they want to hang out. The female cop wants to hang out with our main character, and she wants to, just hang out, no homo, maybe spend the night, no homo. Actually, can we share the same bed? I just want to be close, no homo. And it's this weird dichotomy where, honestly, to any reasonable person, it seems to me that she just wants to get closer and closer to her romantically, at least in this one circumstance. But we're reassured to the reader, like literally over and over. She doesn't say the words no homo, but she says something equivalent to that. And she says it over and over and over again, constantly reassuring us, our main character, and herself that she's not gay. It's okay if someone's gay, obviously, that's what they say, but no homo. We do lesbian acts and everything. We're sexual, we're liberated, we'll have sex with women, but we're not gay, obviously. That's fine, but we as the centerpiece of the story would never be that way. And it's just so fucking blatantly homophobic. It just amazes me how people don't see that in the story. This idea of faux presentation of homosexuality as being presented as okay, while simultaneously being pushed away as a possibility, as something that was definitely not something our main characters does. While that itself, I feel like, sure, maybe plenty of straight people just don't think about this shit, so they're not aware. Even if I give that sort of lenience to the reader, to other readers, I am amazed that when we get to the pedophilia, that isn't something that's just so overtly obvious. I mean, it starts off with our 17-year-old child being overtly sexualized by literally every male character we come encounter with, who encounters her, somehow manages to acknowledge not just the fact that she is so sexually attractive by their standards, but they notice it and they like it. That's what I'm trying to say. They always comment on the fact they notice these things and they like it. They always go through, oh, she's very skinny with massive breasts and an almost childlike face. This problematic but caricature view of the stereotypical perfect woman that society seems to have. That same stereotype that society does not want to dissect on why they seem to like that kind of thing. Even that, like, it was so obvious that I think this story is normalizing sexualizing children and their bodies from literally every fucking character who encounters her. But it's when the story reaches the point where it becomes genuinely pornographic that I am just utterly flabbergasted. Because I remember thinking to myself, he may be a pretty bad in all of this, but at least he's not going all the way and having our 30-year-old main character having sex with her. Next thing you know, it happens. And it's in the most, just gets more fucked up the more I think about it, the more I talk about it. Because it starts off with her being nude and giving us a graphic, like pornographic description of her and her body. It turns out, by the way, that she is prepubescent. She has no hair, so she's a skinny, young-faced girl with massive breasts. And we later find out that she hasn't gone through puberty, that something that gets commented on later by the writer, her father, who is like the big bad of the cult, whatever, says, oh, she's transcended beyond sex or reproduction or desire to have sex. And I want to elaborate on that topic in a second, but let's focus on the fact that basically it's hinted at that she can't have children because she hasn't basically gone through puberty yet. And it's also hinted by the fact that she is completely hairless, like a child. And there's so much to dissect here. One, if she's prepubescent, she hasn't gone through puberty, why the fuck does she have such massive breasts? And I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure I understand that breasts are a byproduct of puberty. So how is it that she seems to have, none of the hair, none of the ability to have children, but she does have the giant breasts? To me, it's just such a forced setup by this honestly creepy author to give us this such blatantly fucked up perspective of the perfect woman, skinny, childlike, giant breasts, completely hairless. It's like they genuinely just want a child with breasts. That's all they want. That's what this is. It's so fucked up. I'm just amazed that it's here at all, honestly, and that people don't comment more on it. Going back to the idea of her transcending, that's the word used in the book, anything related to sex or to reproduction. It pushes this idea that I commented on earlier of sex as a negative thing, something to move beyond, as if she is beyond the need for sex, beyond such a trivial or lowly ideal or act. And it pushes this idea much more effectively, much more subtly than any of the telling that's going on. There's so much telling, but it's the things that aren't being told that are so inherently problematic. The things that are done subtly, that if everything else had been done the way all the problematic aspects have been done, it would have been much more expertly crafted book, because it would have been much more subtle, much more effectively done. And maybe that's just because it's such an ingrained part of this author's perspective on life, that he seems incapable of dissecting that, which he really does need to. But it's just so ingrained in the story in a way that I've never seen, I think, in any book before. The sexist and homophobic and pedophilic aspects of the story. It's just all so foundational to this work that it is impossible to move past that in this. The sexism, I think, and the misogyny being the central piece of it. I forgot to talk about the fact that our main character, the female main character, she's constantly talking about her small breasts. It's an ongoing comment, and it's one of those things where I talked about before, how things are being forced. And when we get to the main characters, one of the comments that he makes is, she makes a comment about her breast, and he's like, oh, I love your breasts, your tiny breasts. It's like, it's supposed to be this overarching thing. Well, look at me being so romantic. I'm talking about how I love your breasts, despite the fact that you've constantly said throughout the book that you hate them. And it's forced, it's weird dialogue, and it just doesn't make sense, and it's just so cringe. It's all so cringe. As far as like the dialogue and the writing, I should mention that this is a translated work, so it's possible that a lot of these issues exist with the translators, and maybe the translators are at fault. And don't get me wrong, I think they're definitely, at least in part, honestly, I'm amazed at anyone who contributed this book and allowed it to come out like this. But at the core, there are so many problems, I find it hard to believe that it isn't at its core an issue with how the author approaches this book. There are so many reviews that address the comments that I've talked about on Goodreads. I didn't notice until after I started, and I thought at first maybe they're overreacting. Maybe they're like seeing one tiny thing and blowing it up. But they're really not. It really is as bad as some of the worst comments or reviews seem to say it is. Because of that reason, this is one of those books that I genuinely just strongly recommend against reading. Life is short. Read the books that will help you become a better person. Books that aren't a waste of time, and books that don't just enrage. As much fun as it can be, to be honest, to talk about that. This is not a book worth reading, in my opinion. Again, I'm not saying you should ban it. There's a fine line between saying you shouldn't read something and saying you can't read something. I'm not saying that. But that's sort of why I had this conversation. I felt very strongly about this book. This is BookTube channel. It's been a long time since I felt strong about a book, so I'll give it at that. It made me feel strongly about a book, which is really the big reason why I didn't give up on it, despite it being a one-star read. If you've made it this far in this review, thank you so much for your time. I did enjoy making the review, as angry as it got. Maybe I love the emotion. We all strive for emotion. But as always, have a great day. Stay safe. Actually, before I say that, let me know, have you read this book Are you still inclined to read it? I'm not going to judge you if that's the case. I understand sometimes like morbid curiosity. Or if you just disagree with me, you can say that. Either way, I hope you all have a great day and stay safe, and I'll see you all next time on Josh's Bookish Voyage.